do today. This session
Wait,
is a
sorry,
really
one second.
exciting session.
Now we're live.
Are we in the where are we in the show?
Yes.
Yeah.
If you want to start, we just went live right now.
Okay, cool. So again, Dr. Jacoby Wilson, excited to have everybody in our session today. I hope you enjoyed the keynote address, open plenary from Dr. Jelon White Newsom, Energy versus Power. This session is another exciting session today with some esteemed officials from the U.S. EPA. The session title is the United States EPA and the Justice40 Initiative. So we have several administrators with us today. I'm gonna do a brief introduction of the administrators and also my long-term colleague, Director Tejada. So start with Director Tejada. He is a director of the Office of Environmental Justice of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. He has his PhD and MS degree. He is a career senior executive and has been with OEJ for a number of years now. He leads the EJ programs cross-cutting throughout the EPA and the federal government. His role includes directly supporting communities and working with other EPA divisions, and very important role is helping with the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council. We also have today Regional Administrator Lisa Garcia of Region 2. She is currently appointed as Region 2 Administrator, which covers New Jersey, New York, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands, and 8 federally recognized Indian nations. She's a proud graduate of Teaneck High School in New Jersey, go New Jersey, and Stony Brook University. We also today we have another. These are all great colleagues of mine, so I'm really excited to have them here. We have Regional Administrator Adam Ortiz. He's administrator for Region 3, and this is the Mid-Atlantic region, which includes Delaware, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Virginia, West Virginia, and Washington, D.C., and 7 federally recognized tribes. He grew up in New York's Hudson Valley and received his BA in political science and government from Goucher College. And actually did a lot of work in the state of Maryland and in various roles in the Department of Environment before he moved on in his new esteemed position as head of Region 3. We also have Regional Administrator Daniel Blackman. Mr. Blackman is head of Region 4, and Region 4 covers Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Tennessee. Prior to his appointment, he built a career dedicated to creating economic opportunities for marginalized communities throughout the South, including doing a lot of organizing work with Georgia's Public Service Commission as well. And our final regional administrator is another good colleague, Dr. Earthea Nance. She's the head of Region 6. Region 6 covers states like Louisiana and Texas. She is an accredited environmental engineer who has 2 decades of service working with communities with disproportionately impacted by environmental hazards. She received a PhD in environmental engineering from Stanford University and master's degree and BS degree in civil environmental engineering from the University of California, Davis. And I got to know Dr. Nance through a lot of work with the Dr. Buller and Dr. Wright in the Gulf Coast. So let's move to our first speaker. I'm going to pass the mic to Director Tejada, and he's going to open us up and talk about, some high-level work that the EPA is doing related to environmental justice and also Justice 40.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Wilson. And hey, everyone, happy to be back for this year's conference. Again, my name is Matthew Tejada. I'm the director of the EJ program here at EPA. I am a career civil servant. I'm a career executive in the federal government. So I'm going to try to do this quickly and get out of the way for my esteemed colleagues who are all regional administrators to do their piece, which I think is going to be much more interesting than what I have to share. I just wanted to talk a little bit about giving the context for what Justice 40 is, just to make sure we're really grounded in what it really is, from the executive order and from the implementation that has come out from the Council on Environmental Quality, or CEQ. If I use that acronym, it is the Council on Environmental Quality is the office within the White House. The White House has a lot of different offices and councils. So the one that we work with from EPA in terms of environmental issues is the Council on Environmental Quality, or CEQ. So you'll probably hear me say that a few times. They are the ones that are in charge of the implementation of Justice 40, since it was something that was mandated in an executive order that the president signed on, I believe, his 7th day in office back in January of 2021. So with that, I'm just going to give a little bit of that context. First, I wanted just to make sure that folks are aware. It seems like every month for the last 18 months, we turn around and there is another historic, unprecedented thing happening on equity and justice across the federal government. So Justice 40 is really just one of those pieces. You can look across all sorts of things. Actually, on his first day in office, the president signed Executive Order 13985 on advancing racial equity across the United States. That all by itself, if that's all that had happened in this administration on equity and justice, it would have been a historic milestone all by itself. And it was just one of many things that have happened, including, we had the American Rescue Plan that came out very early in this administration, which had $100 million, $50 million of which was explicitly for environmental justice, another $50 million of which was for air monitoring. And we're actually getting ready to announce those air monitoring grants here in a couple of months. And there's some really exciting stuff in there. I'm really excited for us to start talking publicly about those air monitoring grants. So look out for those coming up soon. And then, of course, last fall, we received the bipartisan infrastructure law, $60 billion for EPA. That is many years worth of annual budget for EPA all at once, and all to go to, actually being able to solve a lot of the legacy generational issues that have resulted from racist and classist systems and structures that have resulted in the perpetuation of disinvestment in many communities of color and low-income communities and indigenous communities across the United States. We finally got a huge amount of resources from Congress through that bipartisan infrastructure law to actually go in to areas that are having waste issues, having water issues, water infrastructure issues, and actually start to fix some of those issues. And then, of course, right now we're waiting on the Inflation Reduction Act, which has another approximately $60 billion for EPA to go into areas and work on things like climate change, the impacts of climate change, energy, renewable energy has another big investment in environmental justice that we're excited for. It's not final yet, but we're already kind of making plans for what we can do with that should it actually get passed by the House and then signed by the president. And then we have all these other policy things that are happening. We have the EPA Strategic Plan, which for the first time ever actually has a central goal on environmental justice. In past administrations, we would sometimes have standalone environmental justice strategic plans, which were great, made some significant strides at EPA in terms of integrating environmental justice into what we do at EPA, but they kind of stood aside from the main EPA strategic plan, which is a bureaucratic document, but it is incredibly important in terms of really focusing the agency on the things that we will actually measure the achievement of, hold ourselves accountable for, hold staff accountable for. So we have an EJ chapter in the strategic plan now. And more importantly, that EJ chapter isn't just on environmental justice, it's also on civil rights compliance, external civil rights compliance, Title VI, disability access, language access issues. Because finally, we're really lifting up at EPA our responsibilities to figure out how we and all recipients of EPA money must comply with our civil rights requirements with the same rigor, with the same level of enforcement and compliance as we do with environmental laws like the Clean Air Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act. So we are making big strides in this administration at that civil rights compliance function. But what we're going to talk about today is Justice 40. And to start off with, I just wanted to make sure folks are really clear on what Justice 40 is and is not. So it's a mandate contained in Executive Order 14008 to deliver at least 40% of the overall benefits of certain federal investments to disadvantaged communities. That's what all Justice 40 is. There are three huge ideas inside of there. One, it's looking at 40% of the overall benefits. It's not just talking about investments. It's talking about the benefits of what government does. So it's not just looking at grants. It's not just looking at actual dollars. It's looking at the results of where we spend our time and energy. It's looking at, how we use our relationships with communities, with states, with tribes. It's looking across the board. at many programs. It's not everything across the federal government. It's not everything at EPA, but it's many programs. And CEQ, that Council on Environmental Quality, in June of last year, a little over a year ago, they actually came up with guidance. I'll talk about that in a minute, to help agencies actually determine which programs would have to ensure that 40% of the benefits of those programs, and here's the last big piece of this, go to disadvantaged communities. And this is the first time the federal government is actually creating a map of the entire United States and is going to label which communities are disadvantaged and which are not. And if you're a community that's been labeled disadvantaged, you are one of those communities that is supposed to be receiving at least 40% of the benefits of the programs that get identified. Okay, so that's, you know, you can say it in so many words, but there are some really big kind of complex things happening inside of this policy mandate. Justice 40 is not a grant program. You can't apply for, you know, a Justice 40 grant. Justice 40 is going to cover hundreds, if not thousands, but at least hundreds of programs across the federal government. At EPA, it is covering the vast majority of our programs and of our overall resources. And at EPA as well, well, let me just unpack that a little bit more. So when we got this guidance from the Council on Environmental Quality last June, it tasked us and all the other agencies involved in this, and it is an all-of-government approach across the federal government, to really start developing, you know, what are going to be those programs, what are the benefits of those programs, and you see here, you know, some of the requirements that we had to look at to try to determine, okay, which programs are going to be in and which programs are going to be out. You know, any program dealing with issues of climate change, energy and energy efficiency, transit, housing, training, workforce development, remediation, pollution, right? So in a lot of agencies like HUD or Department of Transportation or Department of Energy or EPA, you know, this is really incorporating a lot of our programs, a lot of our assets, a lot of the things we do are being pulled into Justice 40. So some of the things that we had to do to go through that is by August of last year, we had to submit an engagement plan, and we've been pursuing that engagement plan ever since, with regular meetings every 2 weeks, every month. A lot of our programs have their own specific engagement plans out there, visiting with communities about different issues on how they should look at the programs, how they should think about things such as benefits or different decisions they have coming up. We also started with 6 pilot programs. There are actually 21 pilot programs originally identified by the Council on Environmental Quality that they wanted to immediately start implementing Justice 40. 6 of those pilot programs are at EPA, and just those 6 programs are probably the majority, you know, over 50% of the annual appropriations that EPA would receive, because it's our big money that goes into water programs, water infrastructure programs, both for drinking water and for wastewater, our Superfund program, our brownfields program, our diesel emission reduction program for school buses. So great big assets from EPA were immediately thrust into the pilot programs. And then by December of last year, we had to not only identify which programs are going to be part of Justice 40, we had to come up with some of the benefits that we thought we were going to be reporting on in terms of, you know, what benefits would actually be counted towards that 40% of overall government effort going towards those disadvantaged communities. So what have we done since then at EPA, just on the policy side? So at EPA, we made very clear, the administrator actually made clear last January when he visited with our National Environmental Justice Advisory Council, that at EPA, we're not going to just make sure that we make 40% of the benefits go to disadvantaged communities, that we are going to exceed that 40% mark. 40% is not good enough. We're really going to push ourselves as an agency and program by program to see how far we can exceed that 40%. And that we were going to very clearly track the benefits, but we were also going to make sure that we started with just tracking the investments, that we really feel it's important to know, first and foremost, where do the dollars go, right? Because you can talk about pollution reduction, you can talk about hours spent or technical assistance given or other things that happen as benefits of government agencies, program implementation, but we really wanted to track that investment of it. We've recently, just put out the actual list of programs at EPA that are going to be covered under Justice 40. You can find that on a website we also put together with all of the Justice 40 information for EPA. I have the URL up here. We also made the decision, because all of this was happening at the same time that the infrastructure law was passed last fall. And so when we started looking at that infrastructure law, with all of this money, all of these resources that could go to these legacy issues in environmental justice or areas with environmental justice concerns, we saw that that was an immediate opportunity to take this policy mandate and marry it with actual resources to fix things that have been affecting communities for generations. So at EPA, we had those 6 pilot programs that were immediately identified by the White House, but we have taken as our phase 1, we've expanded that six program pilot, and we've included in our phase 1 of really pushing on Justice 40 in our programs. Any of those programs that received bipartisan infrastructure law funding are part of that phase 1, along with those 6 pilot programs that were invested in. We're also in the development phase of creating a dashboard and a mapping tool. You can kind of see, I'm giving you a little bit of a sneak peek. It's not public yet, but behind these words, you can see that we're actually working on a dashboard so that we can transparently track where do our investments go. And eventually, when we've defined what the benefits are, and we're in the stage right now, we actually owe some stuff to the White House next month, the next phase of kind of evaluating what the benefits are going to be for Justice 40 at EPA, we're going to start to transparently track that, so that not only is there transparency for the public to see, but I think that transparency is one of the best forms of accountability, so that people can actually see, well, where are the dollars going? Where are the benefits going? And you'll be able to look on this map, and you'll be able to look at the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, which is the map that the White House is creating to identify those disadvantaged communities. You'll also be able to pull in other maps like EJ Screen Maps. You'll be able to bring those in here as well. You can kind of see on the right side of the screen, I mean, one of the things that we're looking for is, where do our investments and benefits show up in terms of the racial and ethnic composition of those communities? So we're going to make sure that we are doing that with the Justice 40 implementation of EPA. I think I've talked too long. I'm going to stop there and back to you, Dr. Wilson.
Thank you, Director Tejada. Thanks for the high-level overview. And again, folks, this is very important. So he laid out what the EPA is doing, and tracking those benefits is very, very important. So I appreciate that presentation. We'll go to our next speaker. It's going to be Regional Administrator Lisa Garcia.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Wilson. So great to be here again. Yes, after many years. On the screen, you'll see my name is not there because there was a little back and forth. But one of the first things that I did when I was appointed regional administrator was appoint a senior advisor for equity. And that's the first time that we've had it in Region 2. And it's great to have Olivia Glenn as the chief of staff and senior advisor for equity. So hopefully one day you'll be able to meet her. But she came from New Jersey as the Deputy Commissioner for Equity and Environmental Justice. So as was mentioned, Region 2 is, sorry for a little bit of background noise, Region 2 is New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and 8 Indian nations. And it's really great to have this opportunity to kind of work in my backyard, my home. My family's from Puerto Rico. I grew up in the Bronx, in Teaneck, New Jersey. And have family throughout the whole region. So it's just really great to be able to have this opportunity. And as Matt and everyone's talking about, to really implement this huge priority around incorporating environmental justice, compliance with the Civil Rights Act, and of course, as was mentioned, the president signed also an executive order on racial equity. So for me, it's really exciting. Just quickly, I was asked to talk a little bit what we've been doing in Region 2. So the first thing was come in and really build relationships again. I felt that, for a few years there, the relationships and that communication wasn't there. And so one of the first things that we did, and we're continuing to do, is get out and meet with a lot of the EJ leaders in Region 2 and really understanding, especially since I've been in government for a while and talking to the region, what's new? What are some of the challenges communities are facing? And what do they want to see us really tackle together and partner with them? So we were up in the Tonawanda, Seneca, and Albany, New York. We've been doing EJ roundtables with New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection in New Jersey, and we've been to Puerto Rico a few times. I'll talk about that more in a second. But like I said, building relationships. And as part of that, going to the Justice 40 piece was really hearing from communities, what does Justice 40 mean for them? And what would they like to see from Region 2? You know, there's a lot of guidance coming out of, as Matt mentioned, CEQ and other places, but we need to deliver for the communities that we work with in Region 2. And so it's been really helpful to hear about the essence of the benefits. Investments is one, let's track the grants, but what's the essence of the benefits? How are you reducing the burden and increasing the benefits? And I think those conversations were really great. The other thing we're doing, which is exciting in Region 2, and it's happening across the country, others may talk about this, but we're also building out basically an office, a Region 2 Office of Environmental Justice, Civil Rights, and Community Partnerships. And so we thankfully, as Matt said, a lot of money came in. We're ready to use it and to hire a few new people to help us build out a regional office. And I'm really excited about that piece. And then the other piece in implementing the administrator's priorities, Administrator Regan was just down in Puerto Rico last week or 10 days ago. The next slide shows a picture of it. What the administrator has created is a journey to justice. And the administrator is going around the country and really focusing on, once again, we need to be in community, listening to community, in the trenches, or bring it to the streets, however you want to say it. And so we did this in Puerto Rico. And it was the first time an administrator went around up into the rainforest. You'll see some of the pictures there. We were on a boat in San Juan, listening to communities and the leaders there talking about the challenges and what they really want to see EPA focus on. And so it was a great trip. Of course, it's always heart-wrenching, but also amazing to see the resiliency and the work that that the communities are doing. And so we're really hoping to deliver on this journey. You know, maybe we couldn't deliver justice when we were there last week, but the fact is that we do have opportunities on enforcement, some of the water infrastructure money that's coming in, and how do we focus all our efforts to bring about those benefits. And so we'll be continuing that work, obviously, with Region 2. We have an office in the Caribbean in San Juan and delivering on this journey to justice. But I think it's a really great initiative and really showcases the administrator's priorities and how we deliver it in the regions. So stay tuned, because a journey to justice may be coming to your region. The one approach I just wanted to mention about how we're doing things a little bit differently, for instance, just as an example, is in Puerto Rico, we were working on the closing of an open dump in Toa Alta. And one of the things that we thought would be really important is that when we have an enforcement order or consent decree, would it be possible to have engagement with the public? And I think this was the first time that we held a public hearing on the closing of an enforcement action of the closing of this open dump. And we just this week, the mayor signed that order with the Department of Justice, with EPA, on the closing of this open dump, with the commitments that the public wanted to see, that the communities wanted to see. So that's one of the things that we're hoping to increase. Once again, you know, for us, the essence of environmental justice is the community speaks for themselves. We need to be at the table. And so this was really great to have their voices in an actual consent decree that we filed with the court. And then just going back to Justice 40, how are we implementing it in the regions? Matt laid out some of the big, the kind of overarching themes, the programs that are in it. One of the things that we're doing in the region, besides meeting with community groups or leaders and Indian nations to find out what they want to see in implementation of Justice 40, is working with the states. As Matt mentioned, a lot of the money will flow through states. And so one of the things that we're doing, of course, with New York and New Jersey, I have a little bit of an easier job than some of my esteemed colleagues here, the other regional administrators. But New York and New Jersey actually have defined either environmental justice communities or disadvantaged communities. And so when we sit down with them and we say, for instance, in New York State, you're going to get $428 million in addition to the water infrastructure money for emerging contaminants, replacement of lead pipes, straight clean water or wastewater infrastructure. We want to see that 49% go to disadvantaged communities. And so it's a pretty easy job with New York and New Jersey to be able to define how we track those benefits, because they also have the mapping tools. They also have the definition. And so we're able to sit down and say, EPA, we want to see the deliverables, the implementation of this funding go to rural communities, communities that haven't received the money before. And one of the pictures in this journey to justice in the rainforest, the one in the middle, are communities that maybe aren't even getting water or, infrastructure. There's such small systems that they really need a lot of money to service the communities in the mountains, in the hills. And this is where we want to see the money flow to. And so for Justice40, we're really making sure that our partners in the states and the territories are focusing on this 49%. And another piece that we're tracking, and I know I only have a few minutes, I'll just quickly say, is obviously brownfields money. In New Jersey, a lot of land, a lot of property was contaminated. It was a big industrial state servicing the ports and the big cities, I would say, of New York and Philadelphia. And so all the industry and manufacture happened a lot in New Jersey. And our job is to clean up those sites with our Superfund program or our brownfields program. And so we're really focusing on delivering some of that brownfields money to clean up sites in New Jersey. And once again, that's the investment, but that the benefit would be to clean up a site, to bring it back to the community as a park or something that the community can reuse for, whatever their desired projects are or what they want to see with the land. And so you just see in New Jersey, for instance, we announced $250 million in investments of brownfield cleanups, and we're going to continue to focus on that work. So those are the type of projects and how we're really thinking about Justice40. And then the other piece I'll say is with the scoreboard or with the tracking piece, of course, hold our feet to the fire. We need to make sure that we deliver on this. And so I'm really hoping that in Region 2, we can also have a tracker that we can then, when we go out to meet with communities, we can continue to show that question of not only is it an investment, we want to see the benefits. We want to see the reduction of burden and increased benefits. And so that's the hope that that's our goal, I would say, with all of us in Region 2. So thank you again for inviting me. It's great to be here again. And I will turn it back to you, Dr. Wilson.
Thank you, Administrator Garcia. Thanks. It was great hearing about the work in Puerto Rico, of course. And of course, the cumulative impacts bill in New Jersey and the climate act that got passed in New York was the foundation for Justice40. So all the great work that's happening in the Northeast, I think it's really a template for what we should be doing in other parts of the country. So thank you for those comments. I'll pass the mic to my regional administrator, Adam Ortiz. So go ahead, Administrator Ortiz.
Thanks so much, Dr. Wilson. It's a pleasure to be back, and I've done my best to attend the symposium every year. I don't always make it every year, but I just want to credit you and your team and the university for making sure that these issues are front and center for some time now. And I also want to recognize, I see a lot of Mid-Atlantic constituents in the chat. So greetings to everybody in Maryland, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Delaware, District of Columbia, and West Virginia who are tuning in today. That's our amazing region here in the Mid-Atlantic, and so pleased to have Maryland's flagship university, University of Maryland, in the region as well. I also want to say parenthetically, just looking at my colleagues here, and they're amazing. I think all of us on this call, and some of us who are not on the call, who are regional administrators, also have a background in human and civil rights as part of our career paths. So, we're coming to do this environmental work. Also, I think with an acute awareness of impacted communities, and we see this work as environmental work, but also as justice and civil rights and human rights work as well. So, so I hope people appreciate just the tremendous background that our colleagues have, and that we're doing our best to take up this charge from President Biden and Administrator Regan to make meaningful, visible progress on environmental justice after centuries of distress for a lot of these communities in some cases. So I kind of taking a cue from my friend and colleague Lisa to the north. We're trying to take it to the streets as well. Environmental justice stuff is it's a concept that's been developed and refined. It's has more legal legs than it's had before, and thanks also to the leadership of different states and cities that have made it real. We have a lot of data as well, and we want to take all that, but we want to make sure that the impacts are real. And I see in the chat concerns and questions about that that it makes a meaningful difference on the ground, and that's been the priority of the Mid-Atlantic region as we've been taking up this charge. So I'm just going to share some notes on what we've been up to and what we're looking to do in the time that I'm here with our team to make environmental justice more and more of a reality. So the first thing that we did was use the tools that we have. Many of you are familiar with EJ Screen and Enviro Atlas. Those are all tools that are accessible to you. If you do a search, it'll come up, and you can do mapping in your own community or in your own region or anywhere in the United States to see what the stressors are in the communities that we're able to document, and also demographic information on lower income communities or racial minorities or historically segregated communities. You can find all that data at your fingertips, and we have it as well. So what we did first was use that data. What are the quote unquote hot spots? What are the places that are the most distressed in our region, so we can focus? We know that we have limited time, and that there's a lot of communities in need, but there's some that are in tremendous need. We want to make sure that we know where they are, that environmental justice happens in places, and there are real people that are affected, and we want to know what those places are in a concrete way and who those people are who are affected. So we did a desktop exercise that we're just about done with. We've identified the 20 we're calling priority engagement communities. We don't want to stigmatize these communities with some kind of negative term, but they're priority engagement communities. These are places where we need to step up and be proactive in meeting the folks on the ground and understanding the stressors. So these are the 20. This is just a first round. We know that there's more than 20 communities of need that we need to get on the ground and walk the streets but this is our first phase. This is our start. Mata, you can go to the next slide. But first we did sort of the desktop based on the information that we have. So we ran environmental justice screen reports, and this is something that can be done. Or if you reach out to your regional office, we can work with you to do it, to see what are the indicators. Is it non-attainment in air quality? Is it water quality issues? Are there lots of brownfields or Superfund sites? Is there flooding? Are there negative high health indicators? So this is all stuff that we're able to do on the desktop. And so we did a deeper dive, and we have all this information. And Mata, you can go to the next slide, where we began creating a dossier for each of the 20 communities. And Mata, you can just spend a few seconds on each of these slides with the black background. We don't have to go into a lot of detail, but just want to give folks an idea that we did a breakdown. We have a summary slide on the 3 major media: water, land, and air, a survey on demographics, and we try to use graphs as much as possible. public health outcomes. We can always do a deeper dive, but we want, our team, and then when we're out in the communities, to be able to share this information in a way that's digestible, so people can see, like, okay, these are the major issues that we're having. This is sort of the status and the state of these communities. So people are working with real information based on data. So these are all profiles from the Brentwood Ivy City community that's in Washington, D.C., along New York Avenue. For those who are from the region, I'm sure you're painfully familiar with New York Avenue, getting in and out of the city. But it's the area where around where the old Hex warehouse is. So there's a bunch of stressors there. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But we wanted in a digestible format to have this information available to our staff, across all of our divisions, but also in a way that we can communicate to the public. So again, there's links included in these dossiers. So people are like, oh, so what's going on with the air? Where's this coming from? Or, what's going on? What are the fish advisories? There's links that folks will be able to click in and do a deeper dive to understand more. So we're completing these dossiers. They're not quite ready for prime time yet, but we wanted to work with other levels of government as well. We're the EPA. We have a lot of money and a lot of authority, but we can't do everything. We have to engage folks at all sorts of levels if we're going to solve a lot of these tougher issues. So our first level is engaging our state partners and co-regulators and co-grantees. So that's Pennsylvania State Capitol. But we've begun our engagement with the different states to be like, okay, hey, these are the communities that are really kind of jumping off the map based on our data. We want to work with you to address these issues and to engage these communities on the ground, but also hear from them if there's communities that are left out. That and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But it's important that the states are on board, because the states have resources, authorities, and also knowledge that we may not have, wisdom that we may not have. And after getting the engagement and the buy-in from our state partners, we're going to continue to go through the different levels of government, county, city, and the communities themselves, because this is really an all-hands-on-deck enterprise. So we can go to the next slide, and I'm just going to kind of run through, just share some notes about what we are seeing and hearing and learning. We're not, by no means do we have, the silver bullet or the special sauce for figuring everything out. We don't, but we need to get on the ground. So just some notes from our walking tour, hitting the streets, as Lisa said, in Brentwood and Ivy City. We went out with some local coalition members. I'm sure some of them are on this broadcast, and we walked around. And kind of an interesting anecdote is along the way, and we have all the stressors. There's rail yard, there's air emissions, there's highways nearby, but you see in the middle at the top, there's that house next to that brick building. Well, it turns out that brick building makes solvents. And as we're walking, an elderly woman from the neighborhood said, "Mr. Ortiz, I want you to stand right here. Do you smell that?" And Matt was there along with us. See Matt looking good in the bottom left corner. I was like, yes, I do smell that. I can't, it was a really pungent chemical smell. So this was a pollution source that was not on our radar, did not show up on EJ's screen. And we had the city of Washington, District of Columbia government on hand, and they're working with us to figure out what's going on and what we can do about that affect. We can go to the next slide, Mari. Sorry, I'm going to kind of scan through these real quick. So this is an interesting one. So Turner Station is near Sparrows Point, the old site of Bethlehem Steel in Baltimore. This is an area we've been involved with for decades. Super fun site. Literally tens of millions of dollars have gone into remediation, working with the city and other partners. They have a landfill nearby. You can see the highway in the background, and it's also a flood-prone area. This was a place, walk through the community with local leaders, and they said, "Hey, EPA and the government, you're doing a good job. We don't have anything to ask of you, but what we really need here is food. We can't get to a grocery store nearby. We're right here on the water, but this park is flooding all the time. We want to enjoy this asset. So are those EPA issues per se? Not necessarily. But can we convene other partners, including economic development and the city government, the local county government, on trying to bring a grocery store into the community? Yeah, we can convene and have that conversation. We can go to the next slide, Mari, and I know I'm almost out of time. West Virginia, tremendous distress throughout West Virginia. So these two communities jumped off the map, older industrial sites, as you can tell from the pictures. So we're on the ground there, but you can go to the next slide. And sort of what the interesting thing was, when we met with our state partners here, we said, hey, these two locations, Charleston and Huntington, are coming off the map as, you know, the places that we need to pay attention to. And what we heard from them was like, yeah, there's some problems there, but those two cities are places that poor people in West Virginia want to go to. Said, Adam, there's all sorts of stuff, real distress in rural and old coal communities that aren't showing up on your EJ screen because they don't apply for permits, because they're too poor and too distressed and off the grid. And here are some examples of just communities that have, direct sewage pipes going right into streams, industrial facilities that were never permitted that are dumping sites. So they said, Adam, we need to work with you because there's lots of places that are off the map that need your attention. And I see Dr. Wilson shaking his head, and I know he's done work in the agricultural sector. So I said, okay, I hear you guys. Work with us to identify 5 communities that we should be paying attention to together. So that's only stuff that you learn when you get out of the office. Those are only things that you learn when you close your laptop and talk to people on the ground. So anyway, last slide. Sorry to kind of overstay my welcome, Dr. Wilson, but we're going to continue to move forward and listen and learn from these communities so we're more precise and more responsive. We're finalizing our strategic plan along with our other regional administrators. We're going to be hosting an environmental justice stakeholder summit, and I expect a lot of you from the region to attend and to be in communication to us. And we're going to continue to develop this list of priority engagement communities and expand it over time. Thank you, everybody, for letting me stretch out a little bit, and please to take any questions afterwards.
Thank you, Regional Administrator Ortiz. Great presentation. Appreciate your comment about community ground truthing. That's something I learned when working with my community mentors with Megan Wilson, North Carolina. Our data is not in your systems. It's not in your databases. So you got to work with folks on the ground, particularly these unincorporated communities, these rural communities, and these communities that have been invisibilized. So I appreciate you lifting up that point. Let's move now to my home region, Mississippi, Region 4, with Regional Administrator Blackman. Go ahead, Administrator Blackman.
Hey, man. Well, I don't have the decorated presentation that my colleagues have, and I've learned so much listening to Lisa, to Adam, to Dr. Nance. It's been an honor to be able to have served with them. I want to say thank you, Dr. Wilson, for what you're doing, also to the university, and also to my good friend, who I know you know well, Mustafa Santiago Ali, all the work that has been done over time. And I'm very privileged to serve in Region 4, which is the Southeastern United States. I'm very proud to first say that while it is a challenge, Justice 40 is in a direct alignment with the goals and the priorities of Region 4, specifically in a case that we are very much focused on how we work with our historically Black colleges. We have more historically Black colleges in Region 4 than any of the other regions, and we're very proud of that. As an alum of an HBCU, the administrator's an alum. He went to North Carolina A&T. I went to Clark Atlanta University. So the ties that we have to our historically Black colleges and creating more parallels to larger institutions and organizations that have done things for so long is a commitment we have, but also, which I'll get into, EJ communities like in Mississippi, where the journey to justice started. We are very proud to know that these difficult and challenging conversations have had to happen on a more consistent basis. And Justice 40 gives us a tremendous opportunity to allow us to engage these communities, not only in a direct way, but also to hold ourselves accountable. And I think Adam and you, Dr. Wilson, you're absolutely right. We have to share information. We have to work together. We have to collaborate. but our regions, and it's on the shoulders of those of us here, which was stated by by Administrator Regan in Puerto Rico. He mentioned to those of us who were privileged enough to be there as RAs that his work is to make sure the programs and the opportunities are available. Our work is to make sure it's executed. So on behalf of the administration and Region 4, we're committed, we're excited, and what a historic time to be a regional administrator at the Environmental Protection Agency. So a couple of things that we want to, I wanted to share really quickly because I want to leave more time for questions and for my colleague, Dr. Nance, to present as well. Within Region 4, we've placed an emphasis on MOUs with our HBCUs. We've hosted, for example, many of these historically Black colleges on direct engagement. We've already signed our first MOU. We're looking at some really big announcements that will be coming out in the next couple of weeks as it relates to what our strategy is going towards the rest of the year and into next year. We've also had the privilege to host 5 interns from Morehouse College's 11-week Imhotep program, where students conducted projects to improve environmental and public health in EJ communities within Georgia. The majority of our focus as it relates to Justice40 is engaging these communities, because the reality is there are certain types of spaces that need to be strengthened: education, pipelines, how we coordinate and make sure that these communities that we want to have an impact in, that may not have the infrastructure, may not have the tools, may not have the wherewithal to be able to apply for some of the competitive grants. We want to change that narrative, right? What is the use of having a phenomenal initiative with insurmountable resources if we can't make sure that we're focused specifically on how the bipartisan infrastructure law will have an impact in a transformative way in these communities? One example was less than 24 hours ago when we actually had a chance to launch our Clean School Bus initiative with updates. We set a goal, for those that don't know, this really amazing opportunity through the bipartisan infrastructure law, $1 billion per year for the next 5 years to transition America's school buses for our children to be healthier and to have healthier environments. And as we know, in a lot of EJ communities, we're seeing asthma rates double, triple, and even quadruple the amount of rates that other communities based on zip code are experiencing. So it's very exciting for us to be able to launch an initiative with the Clean School Bus Program throughout the United States that can help us to transition from diesel emission buses to cleaner buses, right? It's good for our communities. It's good for our tribal communities. It's good for our neighborhoods, our families, our underserved areas. And we want to make sure that we are very adamant about pushing that and directing our resources in those areas. In the state of Georgia, for example, we have 186 school districts, and this is just one of the 8 states in our region. In Georgia, 186 school districts, 140 of them have populations of 20% or more that are living at or below poverty. And we have to address the issues as it relates to the barriers for folks that have been able to participate in the opportunities that are being presented, again, based on what we've heard from Adam and what we've heard from Lisa, and what we'll continue to hear is how do we make sure in the capacity we're in, we're able to reach the folks that unfortunately don't have platforms, that they're able to be in constant communication with them. And one commitment that I've made while I've been here is to go to these communities, to go to Jackson, Mississippi, right, to address those issues directly in the community and not just from a one-size-fits-all perspective. I was very proud to be joined by the administrator this past week. We just gave a historic investment into Lowndes County, Alabama, the Black Belt, where water infrastructure and sanitation equity has overwhelmingly crippled those areas and folks' ability to have access to clean water, sanitary water, for their children to not run the risk of parasitic infection because of wastewater mismanagement. So these are some of the things that we're doing, but we've also in Region 4 placed more emphasis on conducting compliance inspections in overburdened and vulnerable communities, which is something that we pride ourselves on. Why? Because these serious threats to the communities have to be focused on. We're focused on doing that. And as of August 5th, which happened to be my son's birthday, shameless plug, 57% of our inspections have been in support of Justice40. So we're putting, our leadership where the commitment is. And we want to continue to have our conversations with our partners, with our communities, with leaders. And we want to make sure that we're doing this in a consistent manner across the board. We've been able to go into communities throughout our region, such as Port St. Joe, which is outside of Panama City Beach, Florida. EJ community, historically Black community that has not been able to recover since Hurricane Michael. I was very proud to have joined Lisa Garcia and our other colleagues in Puerto Rico a couple of weeks ago to address some of the challenges and the disparities in that island's ability to recover. And we're doing some of the same things in these communities that have not had the infrastructure to build, to do workforce development, but also to transform and allow resources to come into these areas that can really be able to help. In closing, because I know we do have questions, I just want to really make sure that we place an emphasis on the importance of audiences like this as it relates to health equity and disparities and holding us accountable and working with your local elected officials. It's easy for us on this call to give numbers and to give information. 5 billion for this, 1.2 billion for that, 60 billion for water. I mean, these are really, really big historic numbers, but sometimes those numbers can be intimidated to the communities in which we serve. So our focus is not only to be able to tout the amount of resources that are available, but to measure our leadership, especially in Region 4, on how well we're able to distribute those funds and resources and how well we're able to do what I call getting people off the menu and to the table. Because too often, these communities and leaders have been really focused on being challenged and not able to access the funds, the resources, and the availability of that which will help to transform their communities. There's a quote that says we're well able to meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own. To the students, to the generations that will come after us, to those who are leading and that may one day take our jobs as regional administrators, we owe you more. And I hope that this opportunity with Justice 40, with the bipartisan infrastructure law, under the leadership of the Biden-Harris administration and Mr. Regan, who is our administrator, we hope to not only grow and to learn and transform, but we hope to be able to bring resources that will transform these communities long after our service to our regions, but into the future so that EJ communities, underserved communities, and individuals that have been left out of the conversation based on their zip code can continue to thrive and grow and prosper in so many more ways. We're here to listen, we're here to learn, but we're also here to be a part of the transformative opportunity that our democracy has and that each of our regions will benefit from. So I want to thank you so much for the time. I look forward to the questions, and I will mute my mic at this time and pass it on to my colleague. I think Dr. Nance is up next, but Dr. Wilson, thank you so much.
Thank you, Administrator Blackman, for those passionate words. And I just want to say a couple of quick highlights from what you said, and also connect back with Administrator Ortiz. Regional EJACs, how you get to your communities, having a regional environmental justice advisory council, right? We know in your region, Region 4, you got the North Carolina EJ network, one of the oldest statewide EJ networks, the South Carolina EJ network, making sure that every state has a statewide EJ network and there's a regional EJAC in that region, right? I think that's important. And you also talked about that, getting back to that ground truthing, and then you talked a lot about capacity building. The folks who need these resources, how can we give them capacity to actually connect to the resources? Lowndes County, Alabama was mentioned, right? One of the biggest issues in this country, EJ issues, that folks don't have access to basic amenities, sewer and water infrastructure. We work in Uniontown, Alabama, Administrator Blackman. So, communities, folks don't have, like, when you flush your toilet, your waste goes to a sewer treatment plant. Folks in Alabama flush their toilet, their waste either been straight piped out the house or it's going to a containment pond, okay? So these are the type of issues that Justice 40 should be addressed. So thank you for those passionate words. I'll pass the mic now to my colleague and regional administrator, Dr. Earthea Nance. Go ahead, Dr. Nance.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting me, Dr. Wilson. I'm very happy to be here with all of my colleagues. Can we start the slides, please? So I'm the administrator for Region 6. Region 6 is Arkansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Texas, and 66 tribal nations, and hundreds of communities that bear environmental health disparities. So I want to express that in my remarks today, because the volume of the problem, the massiveness of the problem in my region, really does. It's going to take the level of resources and the policy positions that this administration has put forward. We do need that amount of money. This is the largest, in terms of the bill money, this is the largest infusion of dollars that the EPA has ever had. And we're going to spend it all. Next slide, please. So that's my region. Next slide, please. So this is a map using EJ Screen, looking at what we're going to say are statistically areas where the environmental justice index is greater than 80%, making it disproportionate. So you can see the areas of my region that are difficult in terms of the number of census blocks. I don't know if you can see that number, but that's over 19,000 census blocks. Next slide, please. This kind of pares it down to the most extreme, where we have statistical significance of 9 or more exceedances on the Environmental Justice Index. And this leaves us with, you can barely see it, I believe it's 3,505 census blocks. In terms of towns and cities, I believe that's 365 towns and cities that are in severe status. So this is an incredible, vast number. The range of hazards and difficulties that are in these communities across the board. We have air, we have water, we have pollution, we have natural hazards like hurricanes. We have low income. We have 9 or at least 9 of those 12 are exceeded in these areas that are purple on this regional map. So this is really something. So what we've been doing is holding really meaningful meetings with folks, environmental groups, community groups, and all across the region, but starting to meet with them either in person, going on trips to where they are, or holding virtual sessions with them. And what I'm trying to do is come up with, I'm restructuring the way that our region reaches out and works with communities. And it's a work in progress. We are restructuring, and it's basically based on the work that I had done in the past on environmental justice that I saw work over and over again, trying to follow the model that Dr. Bullard and Dr. Wright taught me. And so we're working that way. I have brought on board an expert in coalition building as my chief of staff so that I have that expertise with me. And we're working that way to try to identify how to prioritize many of the problems. So the money that's available is for water, drinking water, wastewater, water infrastructure, lead pipes. It's also for school buses. So that's an air quality and a climate change benefit there. We're exceeding our limit or our number that we had as a goal on school buses. So we're going to have lots of those. It's also for brownfields. We have many sites that could be redeveloped, but if they were cleaned up, then something beneficial. Lisa said, a park, that would be a great thing. We were yesterday in Oklahoma and saw a redevelopment of a park, and we will be hosting the brownfield sessions next week. So we're looking forward to lots of ideas coming up there. And so those are the main areas that the money is really for. It also has some targeted areas, like we have money for the estuary program. We have money for the Gulf, where we have a lot of waters that are coming out of the Mississippi River into the Gulf, and they lack oxygen. It's called hypoxia. And so trying to fix that problem. We also have a lot of non-point source pollution that's not controlled. And there's a 40% goal in terms of reaching disadvantaged communities. Next slide, please. I'm trying to get in as much as I can in my 10 minutes. This is another similar graph to what we already saw. Next slide, please. I think I've already said much of this. 60 billion is what we're getting as an organization, more than we've ever had in history. So this is a moment. Next slide. I believe I was talking so fast that I've already said all of this as well. Next slide, please. And this is that Hypoxia Program, where we have areas in the Gulf of Mexico that have no oxygen, or they have very low oxygen. So that's a hazard there, and we're trying to do something there with some of this bill money as well. Next slide. I think that's my last slide. Nope, brownfields. We are looking at 20.7 million in brownfield assessment loans and grants to 11 recipients in Louisiana, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Texas. And that's just the beginning. Next slide. School bus. We're doing great on the school bus program. We just had some nice press on the work that we had done. I got a nice picture of myself driving one of the buses. So this is a really fun program, and can't wait until they get those buses, because if you've ever remember being in one of those old diesel buses, these are so much quieter, so much better, and there's no pollution. Next slide. That's it. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you. So now we're gonna thank you to all the administrators for sharing your thoughts about your work, and also the director Tejada giving the high level overview of Justice 40. So now we have about 18 minutes for questions. So I'll open us up with a few questions, and we'll take questions from the audience as well. So one of the things we talked about Justice 40, and just from your perspectives from the region, I know you're giving your kind of overview of what y'all are doing. What are some of the challenges that you've experienced so far in your work in the region as relates to Justice 40 as a concept, as something that people to grapple with in the implementation? I'm not sure who wants to go first, but yeah.
I mean, I can take a stab at it. I mean, I think for us, first of all, thank you for the question. I think for us, it really gets down to doing more to get the word out, right? Collaboration with partners, listening to the communities. I mean, the one thing that I respect about my colleagues that are on here, and even Mr. Tejada, is just, I think we're all taking a look at ourselves in the mirror, right? Like, before I got here, I was a national policy advisor for the King Center. And one of the biggest challenges that we face when you come from the grassroots space is that consistent communication, being able to respond. And I think we're all finding ways, whether it's with the faith community or communities, for example, the clean school bus program that I mentioned, which is really transformative for our communities. A lot of folks didn't know that there's a deadline on August 19th, right? And we can't point fingers. We have to be accountable and make sure we're getting information out in those particular areas. And one last thing that I'll say on that, which I think is really, really important, is when you think of these opportunities in communities, we have to find better ways to articulate our message, because oftentimes, for example, I'm one of the most historic communities in my district, which happens to be in Atlanta, Georgia, is the community that Dr. King formerly lived in. We are now dealing with being able to treat these homes, these areas with lead contamination. We're able to go in, and we just listed Vine City and English Avenue on the national priorities list. We have a huge problem with trust, but we happen to know one of the biggest entertainers out of the city of Atlanta, who's and really in the world, that happens to have a studio that's in this community. And we're now saying, how can we work to build trust, not just from a celebrity standpoint, but how can we go into the communities and bring these folks into conversations and looking at ourselves on what we can be doing better. So we're now going to talk about brownfields through conversations around urban agriculture, through working with mitigation, public health disparities. So I think we have to be very intentional about how we're carrying the message and allowing these communities to be a part of the conversation.
Thank you. Any other administrators or Director Tejada want to chime in on that? Challenges? Go ahead, Dr. Nance.
Some of the challenges in my region is that many of our programs have been delegated to the states. And so it's very difficult in some cases in my region because of the history. And, I just tried to express the volume of the problem. And, that's just not by accident. And so we really need, in some cases, our states to meet us up here in the EJ space. And we have states that cannot even use that word.
Yeah.
So I cannot even express some of this difficulty. But we are funded now. We have policy direction to do this. And so I'm using that as leverage, really, to try to form better partnerships. And I'm not saying this is all of our states. I'm just saying that this can be an issue a little bit because we have work to do in this area.
Yeah, and just to follow up real quick, your region includes Mossville, Louisiana.
Yes, it does.
Includes Cancer Alley. It includes the Houston.
Port Arthur, Beaumont, Corpus Christi.
Arthur, Beaumont.
Go on. Permian Basin.
So you have all these communities that have been dealing with the issues of climate change, hurricanes, petrochemical infrastructure. You're talking about the dirty fossil fuel infrastructure. That's so your region is really impacted by that. So I think I know there are probably folks from your region who are probably commenting now, but I think I think they probably appreciate what you said. Can't use EJ, but how do you change that culture when your state partners that make sure environmental justice is actually part of what they actually do, whether it be performance plans, whether it be positive incentives, disincentives? What do you really push the states to do who have not done the job for Mossville, have not done the job for St. James Parish? You know the areas. Go ahead, Dr. Nance.
Well, we're putting together, we're really beefing up the toolbox. We don't have all the tools we need, but we're creating them. We're working with communities to empower the EPA and the communities together so that we can have a little bit more influence. We're really looking at what does work. What are things you can do? There's a lot of room for influence. There's room to do different things within the systems we have. And we've used some of that on our Journey to Justice follow-up. Like Mr. Blackman, we were also that first Journey to Justice, and we've been implementing the follow-up in the communities that the administrator went to. And when we do announce those follow-ups, it's going to be quite impressive.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna go to Administrator Ortiz, and I'll hold off on you, Director Tejada, for another question. Go ahead, Mr. Ortiz. You have any comments about the challenges?
Yeah, thank you. I have to echo what my colleagues have been saying. We need strong state partnerships, and states. We talk at EPA about staffing required to implement Justice40, staffing requirement for all the new funds coming through infrastructure and ARPA. It's a bigger caseload, it's a bigger workload, and making sure that work gets. We talk about it at the EPA with all the support of the president imaginable, but the states don't always have that level of political support. And what we find is that a competitive state environment. The environmental inspectors are not always a priority when states are looking at public safety, education, economic development. So generally what we're finding is that the states are often very willing partners, but there's not always the resources to fully implement, Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Safe Drinking Water Act, in a robust way. And I see some of the questions about, PM 2.5 and others. So we really, one of the things that we've been trying to take on is, not just to support and coach our state partners, but also talk about short staffing to state leaders and governors to make sure that they have the resources to get the job done. And then we have to be on the field to hold them accountable to do it, because as folks know, we're a very delegated agency with the states.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm gonna go to Director Tejada. So, as you know, work with NEJAC, work with WEJAC. How are we defining these investments? That's a question from the audience. How are we defining benefits, right? And the third question is, if you're not classified as disadvantaged by the CJIS tool, is there an appeals process? How do you want to make sure that folks are not being missed, not being skipped by this Justice40 initiative?
So I'll take that second part first. First, we're not in charge of the CJIS tool. The CJIS tool is being developed by the White House Council on Environmental Quality and with some support from folks at the Office of Management and Budget, which is another really big part of the White House. I don't know if they're going to have an appeals process or not. What we, though, are committed to doing at EPA, and I think we're going to continue to provide some leadership just in figuring out how to actually implement and integrate these sorts of EJ policies in practice. And it's tremendous that in this administration, I feel for the first time ever that is not EPA and just a small handful of colleagues at some other agencies that are true believers, but we actually have, for the first time, I mean, the conversations we're having with like Department of Energy, and they have some incredible leadership over there with folks like Shalonda Baker, folks over at Transportation, and people like Christopher Coase. And we've got some tremendous leaders and commitment much beyond EPA, but we're going to continue to provide EJ leadership out of EPA. So one of the things that we're going to be committed to do is we're going to look at the CGIS tool. We're going to use the CGIS tool for everything that it's worth. But we're also going to use EJ Screen. And we're going to look where our investments go and where those benefits go. And we're going to compare it to the CGIS thing, but then we're going to compare it to EJ Screen, and we're going to compare it to communities of color, and we're going to compare it to low-income communities. We're going to look where it's showing up in tribal spaces and in indigenous communities. And we have the ability to do that. You know, I think one of the most important things, and kind of an answer to the last question, there's incredible power in data. And the more that we can make more data, more transparent, more accessible, more meaningful, I think the more that we're going to see folks, you know, see a tool like CGIS or see a tool like EJ Screen and think, those are great. You know, I can learn things from both those things, but I also want to look at what the state tools are saying. I also want to look at what, like HHS, Health and Human Services, just released a new tool yesterday that has some really cool stuff in it that I still haven't even completely played with and figured out. So I think all of these things are going to help add to not only the ability of us in the government to actually more finely tune where do our programs show up and where do those benefits and investments flow, but on the outside, and again, I think that is one of the most powerful tools and pathways towards accountability, and not just holding us accountable, but going back to what Regional Administrator Nance was speaking to. I think you're going to see, my prediction is you're going to see different conversations happen and different movement result when you start to see these things break down along state lines, where we can really look at, well, what is state X, you know, because states in a lot of the water infrastructure, by statute, states get to determine what the disadvantaged communities are. And there's a lot of variation from state to state in how they define disadvantaged communities. But when we can actually start to show, well, state X has this definition and state Y has this definition, and now let's watch the money flow through these two states and where does it wind up, right? I think you're going to see a lot different conversations and a lot different sort of work happen in many states that can typically be tough to do environmental justice on the ground. Now, there was also, to the first part of your question, you know, how are we going to define benefits? We're still figuring it out. The White House gave us a new deadline just a few weeks ago that's coming up here in a few more weeks, where they finally, you know, we already did one round of providing some benefits, really kind of a benefits brainstorm to the White House, because this is the first time that we've had to turn to our program colleagues and say, you know, start thinking about what benefits mean from your programs in environmental justice terms. Start thinking about what can we actually realistically track? What do we have the data for? How deep does that data go? How granular does that data go? And thinking about like those big water infrastructure programs where the money goes to the state, and then it goes to the COG, and then it goes to the county, and then it goes to a city, and then it goes to a utility. Like trying to figure out how to track that dollar through that system, and then trying to figure out how to track the benefit that accompanies those dollars through that system. That's going to be a piece of work, but that's what we're committed to doing now. So we're working on the second phase now, where we're moving from kind of a brainstorm of the benefits of last year to really putting some stuff down on paper right now that is owed to the White House. I think it might be, I actually don't know when the deadline is. It's coming up though, because everyone's worried about it. And I'm going to talk to some of our water programs right after this meeting because everyone's sweating it. But that's going to start to get real. I think one of the frustrations in this, and I mean, I don't have a good answer for it or an excuse for it. All this is being run out of the White House, which is one of the things that the president very clearly established on day one of this administration, that equity and justice were going to be huge priorities. It was going to be an all of government approach, and the White House was going to give leadership to it. Because in previous administrations, you know, the White House kind of delegated it to EPA. So the White House is in the driver's seat in terms of we're turning our information into them, and we got to kind of wait for them to say, okay, you can release that information publicly. So there's a frustrating part in there that I don't really have an answer for. But the work of figuring these things out has never been as energized as it is right now. You're on mute, Dr. Wilson.
Thanks for that. We're down to 4 minutes before the transition, the break before the keynote address from Dr. Buchanan. So there's a couple more quick lightning responses. I think y'all all mentioned this engaging communities piece is important. and some of the systems that are in place are maybe part of the challenge to getting the dollars down to the folks. So how are you, administrators, how are you going to make sure that community people, community-based organizations on the front line, fence line, trusted leaders, they're the ones at the decision-making table, and they're also the ones that are getting these dollars that come from the IRA, that come from infrastructure bill to make this Justice 40 happen, the Justice 40 work. So we got 3 minutes left now. Can y'all just real quickly, what are you doing to make that happen?
We do outreach to communities to make sure that they get their applications in. We give them technical assistance to help them with the applications and make sure they get them in on time.
Okay.
To add on to what Dr. Nance said, we are not only doing all of what she just said, but we're actually getting out of our freaking offices, man, and we're getting into these communities. I mean, it's one thing to know all these opportunities. It's something else to go to North Birmingham, Jackson, Mississippi, Lowndes County, Alabama. You got to go to these places. You got to make these commitments. Then you got to go back to make sure you're following through.
What they said. And also we hosted a webinar that had 1,300 participants a couple months ago. Focus was on funding and getting funding, and we're going to continue to do them and build our list. We need a grassroots list to get to people. So I've charged our Office of Public Affairs with getting lists of homeowners associations, grassroots organizations, NGOs, and all of you listening, if you want to be added to the list or want to help build our list, drop me a line. You know how to reach me.
And I want to put a plug in there, because from the National EJ program, just on this past Friday, we announced a request for proposals to establish thriving community technical capacity building centers for communities across the United States. This was a huge thing that a lot of EJ leaders were hoping for in the Build Back Better plan last year. There were $200 million in the Build Back Better plan. When we didn't get that, we set out, we've never stopped doing EJ inside of EPA. So we set out as EJ advocates, and we started organizing, we started leveraging, we started being a little entrepreneurial inside of the government. So we have that RFP on the street right now. We have at least $50 million right now. And what we had hoped would happen is happening. You know, we are building it, and people are coming with their money wanting to buy into this thing. I think by the time we actually stand these things up, we will do better than the Build Back Better $200 million, and get those technical assistance centers out across the entire United States to support communities with their needs in those ground floor level capacity limitations.
Yeah, and I was actually going to go to that. Thank you for Dr. Tejada. I was going to say for the attendees, that RFA is important, but structurally, that RFA, Director Tejada, and regional administrators, that is a concept and approach that should be implemented. So regardless if you only, I'm not sure how many you're going to fund, but from a regional perspective, you should have these hubs, these technical assistance hubs in every region where HBCUs, tribal colleges, Asian Pacific Islander colleges, right? Hispanic separate institutions in your region, Dr. Nance, that they are part of that infrastructure, right? Working with faith-based groups. I'm going to ask the question, working with your statewide networks that I mentioned before. That is an approach that they want to make sure that's durable and sustainable, and that there's dollars not coming just from the EPA, but through your IAC, there's other federal agencies that are also kicking in money. I mean, down the road, Director Tejada. So again, the durability, sustainability. So I just want to put that in as a solution, the framework to make sure Justice 40 is just not fleeting on the benefits. You got the monies and you got the infrastructure, and community has to be a center of that. So I know we're at time. I talk way too much, but I'm gonna give y'all one last chance to any 30 seconds to say, what's your vision for the future as an administrator, and give you appreciation for your time. But go ahead. Who wants to jump in? Just 30 seconds to close us out.
My vision is that everybody in the building here at Region 6 is embedding environmental justice and climate change into everything they do, whether they're opening up a permit and reviewing the permit, whether they're meeting with the community, whether they're doing anything that we do, that every single person has that on the inside of their head and in all of their work, so that we can really get it in every part of the organization.
Thank you. Who's to go next?
I'll go next. And I said this my very first day in this job to our team, is that environmental justice is not the job of Samantha Beers, who many of you know, or our EJ office. EJ is everybody's job, and it's what we do every day. Brush your teeth, comb your hair, open up your laptop, power it up, and put on your EJ lens, because it's something we do every single day, every minute of every day.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Administrator Blackman?
Build and recruit the future. Stand on where we are. Build an agency in regions that outlast our leadership. We are very fortunate to be able to recruit. We're very fortunate. Again, I've mentioned traveling to Puerto Rico for LULAC once or twice, but our Hispanic communities, our AAPI community, our Black and brown friends that are within the agency, we have to have real specific pathways to not only recruiting from within, but to building the future of the agency so that this work not only persists, but regardless of any administration, the work continues. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Close with you, Dr. Tejada.
So my job is literally to work to make their visions a reality. And luckily, in this administration, with the leadership that you've heard from here, I don't have anything to add.
Thank you. Great presentations, great session. Appreciate y'all's great work. Let's take a break and see everybody back for the keynote address, lunchtime keynote from Dr. Buchanan. Thanks and take care, everyone.